Hello. I find it I find it amusing that it's always a guessing game for me when this actually starts. There's like about 10 seconds where it doesn't give me feedback. Um, yeah. So um, I wanted to go into this whole interwoven topic set of sort of like this question of the experience of time, the experience of death and dying, and what it's like after death. Uh, like a kind of a very particular flavor of forgetting and remembering. Um, there's a sense of being a little like, oh, this is so big. There's so many different weaves, but it's like one coherent topic that I feel some desire to speak to. I find it fascinating and beautiful, and I find it very deeply touching to my heart. The deeper I dive into this, and the deeper I understand it. Um, so, like I mentioned this, excuse me, I mentioned this in the text. Introduce. I mentioned it in the text introducing this video, but there's like I remember how I would read these accounts of like the Buddha going through his enlightenment and then realizing reincarnation. And there was a way where I just would stare at that and I go, okay, that's great. You had some kind of realization, but there's a really basic problem, which is how can you possibly, how is it at all possible to have any kind of experience in doing a meditation or whatever that can possibly tell you that there are past lives? I could see where you could get information that is consistent with that. You might get a vivid sense of, oh, I remember being a peasant in Europe. I remember doing, like, talking to a shaman in South America. Um, and I don't know how long ago that was, because I didn't carry my soul calendar between them, or maybe I did, I don't know, but it's like this was long ago, and I was a different person then, because this has all the tag of being a memory. Great. So um, the the thing is that the by far the easiest explanation is along the lines of, oh, I remember like 20 years ago reading some fantasy fiction, and sometimes I'll go back and I'll read some of that fiction and I'll remember, oh, I completely forgot about this scene. I completely forgot. I forgot that there's this bit where the child wizard that you're supposed to relate to is figuring out how to cast a healing spell he just learned a few minutes ago, and in a kind of emergency situation, and there's all this intensity, and like, given that I can have the recognition when I see those of, oh, I remember having read this, that means that it's kind of sitting there in the back of my mind. So if I suddenly, when I'm going through a meditative experience, I have this flash of having been some kind, oh, this got shaky a little bit. There we go. Having been some kind of healer, or some kind of medical person, like I was bloodletting on people back in the Middle Ages, it seems like it's a lot more likely that somehow dreamlike associations happen between things that I've read or heard before, um, and that somehow got whatever the mental tag is of a memory. Like, we know that people misremember things, and we know that people can be certain of memories that turn out to be false. So that means that the sensation of remembering is unreliable. So if you're using that as the primary personal evidence of something like reincarnation, there's a problem. There's a really significant logic problem. Like, how do you know? Oh, I'm certain. Okay, great. Have you ever been certain of anything and wrong? Right? This is a very humbling experience, and really taking it in and going, oh, I can be certain of something and wrong. Not as an abstract fact, but it happened here. I remember, and it happened here, and it happened here. In my life, I remember. Ugh, okay. So, hearing that and hearing, and the Buddha's story is not unique. Like a lot of people who go through deep spiritual experiences will come back going, yes, and there's existence after death. This is an illusion. In fact, and the weirdest one for me is there is no such thing as death. Death is a joke. It's an illusion. It's not there. There's no such thing. And I'm left looking at things like, well, thanks. But you know what? I still hurt for the loss of my cat. What do you mean death doesn't exist? Right? So, by the way, that didn't happen recently. Uh, I'm thinking of the first time I actually encountered death in a way that hit me in the heart, and that was when I think I was 9, and I came back from my first summer camp experience, and when I came home, I was so relieved to be home. My parents hugged me and then immediately told me, "We need you to know, sweetie, our Colonel Kitty died." And for me, there was this whole experience of, that's otherworldly. That does, what do you mean he died? What? And then they took me to see his grave in the backyard. It was the strangest experience of the time. It now makes some sense to me, but there's still a kind of strangeness to it about looking at that and sort of like something in me grieved. It grieved me. It moved through me to cause grief. I just felt this welling of sadness. This is usually how I experience sadness and grief. There's a sense of something in me moves the energy. I don't decide. So, but that was almost 30 years ago. So, and I've lost count since then too. But back to the point, there's this sense of, okay, Siddhartha, how can you possibly know that? I believe that you have a vivid sense of knowing that. Totally believe that. And I can believe that that comes with a sense of profound insight and clarity. Absolutely. And and I still think that there's a very special kind of confusion that's happening there. I suspect that the most common rhetoric around things like encountering dead people in near-death experiences, and when going to the realms beyond death, coming back and saying, I remembered my past lives, and here's how this worked. And having listened to it and watched people go through these kinds of realizations, like watch people go into plant medicine ceremonies where they go into deep psychedelic states and then come out, and then they say, I remember we knew each other in a past life, you and I, and you were a father in a past life. And I'm left looking at that going, yeah, there's an important way where I'm something like not convinced that they understand what those experiences actually mean. And I don't mean that I do, but I think that there's a swiftness with which the mind loves to have an explanation, and most of those explanations don't make a lick of sense, but it gives the mind something to grip onto. But having been through some of those experiences myself now, like many, many, many of these experiences where I walk through the gate of death and I see what comes after. Like, I'm not special in this way. I mean, maybe I'm a little bit in the same sense that I seem to have a mind that's very sharp. That makes me a particular kind of special in the sense that the sharpness is compared to something. But that's not anything about me being better or me being special. It's just, it's true. Like I've had these experiences. And in that, like I'll share some of my own sense of what that's about, what's going on. But I think the first and foremost, this is the clearest thing for me coming back and looking at this with a sense of, I know what it means to know something. I know what clarity is like. For quite a while, I've been for quite a while, for a couple months. That's not really quite a while. Like it's been less than a year, let alone less than a century. Very little time. Um, for a little bit of time now, I've been working with Perry Chase and her approach to resonating deeply with what is. She encourages get in touch with your inner knowing and find what's yours to serve. Um, and the inner knowing was something that I've been emphasizing for a while, but sort of from a weird place, from the intellect. All this stuff about wise knowing is a reference to there's a place from which you know. That you know. It's not about, I know because of here is this logic. That logic gets you there. What happens afterwards? How do you know you've done the logic right? Oh, because I'm following the rules. Great. How do you know you're following the rules right? You don't solve that with thought. You solve it with something else. Right? So getting in touch with that inner knowing and then resonating. And then this is one of the big pieces that I got from Perry, this business of really feeling into what is it that really wants to come through me, feeling its essence, and letting it clear me out so that I am more freely able to get out of the way for it to come through me. And I still don't quite, I don't have what she calls the clunk. I don't quite have, that's it. I know that's it. But I have a bunch of pieces around it. And there's something around clarity, clear understanding. And so going through these experiences, I find where I'm inclined to go with them is not, oh, I now see how the universe works. It's more like, oh, I have this vivid impression of seeing how the universe works. And much more importantly, I recognize how deeply I don't know anything, including just how deep that not knowing truly is. It's like, so I want to ground this a little bit because there's something about what I want to point out is an experience that I claim we're all having all the time, whatever that means. Like, because there's it's more like it's like in order to experience a coherent world, as though there's this certain sequence of events that happen through time, and we're operating in a world where there are people and we're interacting, and I go and I can get a tax bill, or I can send an email on the internet. To live in this kind of world, there's a particular kind of pretend that we have to do. Like there isn't a way around that. There's, I could wave my hands and say something quantum mechanics. Everything is wiggling magical reality fluid, and I mean that in the sense of in quantum physics when they talk about the Schrodinger wave equation, when they talk about everything is vibration at some kind of literal level, it's wiggling math. There's no clear sense of what it is that's wiggling. So one physicist friend of mine referenced this as, yeah, like the Schrodinger wave equation is describing how magical reality fluid wiggles. And so there's something to say about that, about how even in quantum mechanics, when you look at how the math actually works, we don't even experience the vibrations. We experience a very particular way in which the vibrations collide. There's a huge amount about the whole thing that we don't experience at all. There's a question of how does this unfold over time. Some of the clearest models actually fold time as a subset of what is wiggling, if I understand correctly. I may have misunderstood that. But there's a way where the entire impression of there being a 3D world that has this particular shape is itself something that we sort of create. But who's creating it? It's created sort of within the 3D. It's really befuddling. But you don't need quantum mechanics to sort of see it, and that's the whole game here. So one example of this I can make very concrete. Oh, I see. Hello, David. Let's see. So you say, from your recent talks, it seems you are also aware that your sense of certainty/doubt is similar to others, but rooted in a different junction in inner knowing. The death thing is awareness that this organism's organization membrane is not ultimate, but it is for all practical purposes of this life. Yeah, I think that's reasonably accurate. Um, I think in some important ways I have become a heretic. Like I absolutely, well, I'm not quite sure how to say this correctly. I think it is fine to say that I thoroughly believe in science and the scientific paradigm and scientific materialism. It is a magnificent tool. I absolutely believe that it totally works. And I see how it describes our experience in all of this detail. Also, there's absolutely no way it could know that it's true. That's the way in which I start to become a real heretic. Um, I'm not claiming what's really true is consciousness. I'm more noticing that when I actually trace what I know and how I know it, and I start pretending that logic is something I can trust, the logic does not allow me to conclude that that there's a physical reality outside of me that creates my capacity to use the logic. Because it doesn't answer the question, well, then where does the logic come from? How does the trust in the logic work? I often summarize this by saying, well, then where's the math from? Where do these physical laws come from? I don't mean that as a knockdown argument to say that scientific materialism is false. I mean more, I don't see any way we could possibly know. Which adds an element of humility to it. It adds an element of, okay, well, I seem to be under the impression that this works. So when looking at something like, okay, here's this biological membrane, maybe. When I take that frame, it seems to work. But there's some things it really doesn't explain very well at all. A lot of the trick of the scientific paradigm is to define into oblivion everything that it doesn't know how to explain, or to pretend that because it can think of a way that an explanation might be forthcoming, that that's good enough. The hard problem of consciousness is probably the most obvious example of this. But also related to that, things like, oh, we can explain color in terms of frequencies of light. Kind of. I mean, what you can notice that there's this thing about modeling light as these frequencies that lets you change experience when you pretend that you are operating in time. But we still don't know what the link is between light and the experience of color, which again gets back to the hard problem of consciousness. Oh, well, we'll figure it out. It's something having to do with the brain. It's this area of the brain that lights up. Okay, great. That's still a mechanism. But how do we get from the mechanism to the actual experience? Like, and I'm not saying this is, again, a knockdown argument against scientific materialism. I'm just pointing out that there's a lot of confidence that it's true. But what does that even mean? I don't think we can know. And I'm just being honest with what I notice I seem to be capable of actually knowing. But that's a bit of a philosophical tangent. But I see it seems to have activated a little bit. Rupert, hi. You say, I can construct an account of how I know the truths of logic and mathematics within this model of how reality is, which is based on logic and mathematics. Yeah. Cool. I think that it would be interesting to see that. Not right now. Just to push back a little bit on it. Can you do it without relying on logic and math? Because if you can't, then what you're showing is that it's internally consistent. You're not showing how you know you can trust it. What you're doing instead is you're trusting it, and then you use it to show that that trust doesn't violate itself. That's very different than noticing how that first step works. And that's about the relationship between the experience of the logic and the logic itself. But it's quite, I can also believe that you've somehow accounted for that. Like, I don't know how. I don't see how that's plausible, but that could just be a fact about me. Anyway, so this is getting a little bit off into the weeds. Just keep noticing this funny thing. Oh, let me get rid of that piece of experience. I enjoy that, and I find it a fascinating topic, and there's a thread that I want to go down. So I notice that when I actually experience, when I pay attention to my experience of the flow of time, I basically never experience the flow of time. It just doesn't happen. There's some kind of illusion that appears. Like earlier this morning, I was listening to some music. I can somehow hear the music. I can experience it. I can feel the movements. I can recognize pieces. There's something a little strange about that because I never actually hear music. What I hear is this set of notes, and then this set of notes, and then this set of notes. And somehow, out of only ever experiencing this moment, I construct this experience of hearing music. Okay. Now, we can do some interesting things with that about, oh, here's a computational model of how this works, and here's how the brain seems to do this with these different pieces. But there's a funny move there where we're presuming time in order to explain the experience of time. It's actually, in some sense, it's the same loop as I was describing before. There's this, like, well, why are you presuming time? Oh, because we experience it. Well, how do you know? Well, because I do. How sure are you of that? Like, where does that confidence come from? No, I have inner knowing. And there is something real there. There is something about, okay, there's like I know that even if the experience of time is just a complete illusion, I know I'm experiencing this illusion. So here I am having this impression of having talked in this live stream for a little bit. But what I'm experiencing is now with this memory that is stitched together of the structure, the flow of this being this moment being a continuation of moments in the past, and a sense of there being moments in the future. Rupert is speaking up to see if we go in this direction. Okay, yeah, yeah, Rupert. I think, yeah, I'm not too surprised to see that. Since I also put this on YouTube and people don't get the comments. Rupert says, no, I have to rely on the basic laws of logic and maths to get started. It's an inescapable circularity. Yeah, and that doesn't mean it's not valuable. It doesn't mean it's not important. The internal continuity and consistency is super valuable. I'm just looking at the raw foundation of noticing, how do I know anything? Not analytically, just directly looking. Where does this come from? And I notice that when I do that, I observe these loops, and there's a place that's more basic and more profound from which I can go, okay. And I don't know if that loop makes sense. I notice my mind gets into loops where I get very certain that other people are out to get me. Why? Because I feel scared. Why? Because they're out to get me. Well, that's consistent. The mind's really good at consistency. Well, I mean, it can be good at consistency. It can be good at creating the impression of consistency, I should say. And so I've grown a little suspicious of my mind's confidence that consistency means truth. So with the loopy experience of time, I'm the same thing. I'm not claiming that there's no such thing as time. I'm saying that the experience of time has a kind of circularity to it. There's a way that I have to kind of pretend that I buy into it in order to experience it. This is almost always just automatic in the background. a lot of my experiences in Mexico were in part making it really in the front. I had had these experiences before, but in Mexico I had this ongoing experience over the course of days, which is a very weird thing to experience when I'm watching how I'm buying into time, and that within that frame of time I'm pretending that minutes and days are passing in which I am in this experience of choosing to buy into the illusion of time. It's different. It's very different. The, um, the hilarious thing is that it's not. It's always like that. It has to be, because that's the experience from beyond time, which means it's currently happening. um, so the, there's this there's an experiential clarity that cuts through the illusion and results in a very vivid sense of not knowing how this works. So I realize I've gone into the direction of time. I haven't, and I want to go back to this issue of death. Um, um, but I think and there's something important about, yes, obviously there's a relationship between time and death, but this buying into nature and the fact that it's possible to forget, I think is actually more central. I think that's actually the key, and that for the most part, our ways of talking within our shared illusion of time and our shared illusion that we exist as separate entities from one another, all of that, it gives us an opportunity to create stories of a kind of boogeyman that is death. That, I suspect, I don't know because I haven't really carefully compared notes. I notice that when I talk to other people who have similar experience, who claim, oh yeah, death is an illusion, and I start comparing notes going, are you talking about this? We seem to match up, but I don't know. My experience of it is that when we're talking about the illusory nature of death, it's talking about this way in which the story we make about what death means is very similar to the story about the story we make about what time means. It's not that we don't experience it, it's that there's an illusory nature to it. And that doesn't mean it's not there. It means that you can't know if it's there. And again, I'm projecting and I'm making this a general thing. But my lived experience is vividly that there is no way for me to know. There's no way for me to know. It's almost like a deep, deep, deep choice. I am choosing to pretend that I know that time exists and that I am moving through time. And part of that involves forgetting the fact that it's a choice. And then here I am in this moment. Whatever that means. Part of what that does for me is it gives me access to this tremendous, tremendous gratitude. And having experienced the contrast, now for me the contrast was actually pretty horrific. And that's an artifact of how my mind is set up. Language will very quickly get very confusing here because I have to describe my experiences in sequence, but part of these experiences are about how experience is not in sequence. And depending on which side of the experience I'm on at a given moment, it's not at a given moment or not. It's all happening all in the same moment forever. Absolutely clear. Self-evidently clear. Just as clear as when I re-enter time, and I'm noticing as I come back into the illusion of time, I have this experience of remembering that I left time and noticing the way in which I'm constructing that experience. But then after the experience is constructed and I am fully in the illusion, I remember having left. And I kind of buy into that story. And then within the illusion of time, it then makes sense to talk about having left time and then coming back. But that actually makes no sense while outside of time, which I always am. So there's this space where it's very tricky for my mind to grab onto what exactly this means in a totally consistent to experience way, and then tries to do this kind of move where it forgets about the integrity of the eternal experience, the integrity of this profound direct encounter with the structure of consciousness and how it interacts with reality, and instead tries to fold it into a story that the mind can hold on to. That's the forgetting. And there's nothing wrong with it. So when I'm looking around and utterly astounded and delighted in, I'm experiencing this. There's something about, does experience exist at all? Well, yes and no. Forever. Both simultaneously, but really only one. Which one? Well, like, there's nothing here, which is why we're experiencing this, but we're not. And the point of these paradoxes, the point of these these befuddling highlights is, to me, it is holding it's giving me a way of holding on to memories of these experiences, or more importantly, I will get experiential glimpses of right back into this kind of clarity that go beyond what the mind's usual way of organizing and forgetting can account for. By doing that, I can remember in a much more relevant way how precious and fascinating this illusion is. And then a lot of the stuff I was talking about yesterday becomes a lot more accessible. Right? A lot of this business of, I'm feeling sluggish and I'm embarrassed and my mind won't think straight. How do I solve this? Oh, I'm trying to fix the problem, and that's creating loops, and it's all terrible. And there's something about, it's all terrible. It's possible for me to experience everything being terrible. And then? How does and then work? I have no idea. But somehow, and then, it changes. And later I'll feel better. And then later I'll feel worse. And then later I'll feel better. Like, it's just, how is this possible? I don't know. That's not a mental puzzle. It's an observation. I don't know. But it's not, fuck if I know. I'm not disconnecting from it. I am astounded by it. That move of being vividly in touch with this not knowing, it feels like prayer or reverence. For what? I don't know. I could say for God, for God's creation. I think that's a traditional Western way of talking about it. I could also say for myself, because it's obvious I'm the one creating this illusion. But not the version of me that is talking within the illusion. That's the ego. It's not that the ego is constructing all of this. Michael isn't making all of this. So who is? When I say I, who am I talking about? The true self. What does that mean? It's like I've got this little goblin in my head that is really me, right? it's it's a paradox, and it's a paradox that is just outside of what the mind can actually hold, what my mind can actually hold, which is insanely useful because it means it doesn't matter what I'm experiencing at any given moment, whatever that means. There's always this portal to me opening up and experiencing something with deeper reverence and gratitude and delight. And when I do that, I notice my life keeps getting better. I feel clearer in my system. I have easier interactions with other people. Synchronicities happen that drop opportunities in my lap. I stopped getting nearly as many negative synchronicities. I stopped getting things like, I thought I was going to take care of this thing today, but instead my computer died, and then I turned into a kumquat, and like, it's I, I I don't really fully understand the mechanisms there, but I see a lot of them. It's sort of like how if you're when I'm if you're that's that move. I'm slowly getting better at catching this. This is really cool. Um, when I'm feeling agitated and a little ashamed, and I'm trying not to notice my shame because I won't let myself really experience the shame, really enjoy it in a way, enjoy the marvel of the fact that I can be miserable in shame as I'm experiencing it. When I'm in this kind of internal denial and a forgetting of what's even present there, and then I'm talking to my girlfriend, sometimes I'll find myself sliding into nitpicking her ideas and clarifying because I'm trying to just be precise. And it's coming from a place of care. And like, well, you know, there's a lot of bullshit. That's a lot of bullshit. But I'm not in a space to catch it if I'm letting myself forget that deeply. So bringing in this thread of remembrance from beyond time does something really profound with my capacity to play within the illusion from a place of love, compassion, authenticity, openness. And it keeps opening up. And the reason any of those matter is because it makes this experience much more exquisite, and it keeps getting better. That's magic. That's wondrous, beautiful. So when I take that and I orient to this question of, okay, reincarnation, really? First, I want to say, having gone through these experiences, first, I have not clearly remembered any past lives. I've not had any experience like that. Okay? And I could imagine my opinion might change if I got a really vivid hit of, I remember. But with that said, my experience is that I've seen where people get this impression from. I saw, and sometimes am seeing, and therefore am always seeing, whatever that means, the existential thing. It's not even a thing, the existentialness that is beyond the illusion of time. And it was immensely obvious to me. It is immensely obvious every time I go through that experience. Right, this is what death is like. Now, I'm under the impression that a lot of people who go through near-death experiences actually go through an arc where they encounter a bunch of things that as they re-enter time, when they become incarnate again, again, because it's a near-death experience. Like you die because like your heart stops or whatever, and then later they revive your heart, and then you had some experiences in the middle. This is insanely well documented. This, if we had a world that actually cared about its fear of death, and we wanted to understand how we relate to our own existence, this is something that we as a culture would take a lot more seriously and take a look at. Well, what are these experiences? Oh, they're just brain phenomena. First off, you don't know that. And second, there are a bunch of documented cases of people having experiences that have confirmation about what's going on while the person has no brain activity. It's possible that somehow all of those are flukes, but it's interesting that that's an assumption, or that something that people who are really soaked in scientific materialism just either assume or don't even bother looking at, rather than something that we're seriously talking about and going, we don't know. It would be surprising to our current models of how physical reality works. But let's look. like, And it's understandable, it's necessary, it's part of the game of forgetting. It's how we can enjoy this illusion. We've just sort of taken that forgetting a few extra steps down the road and now believe that we believe the illusion so much that we believe we understand the illusion. We really don't. We don't. But that's okay. Um, but when people come, a very common experience, however it happens, even if it turns out to be a brain phenomenon, that's fine. Um, when people come back from their encounters with the light or with something transcendent, they sometimes talk about meeting God and having these life-changing experiences. Um, and then they come back, they talk about how, oh yeah, I talked to my dead parents, and then I went and had some very profound spiritual experiences where I was shown different parts of my life. They talk about it as though they brought up this TV screen, or there were all these profound sensations that went through their body. It's unclear what's going on there. And then it was time for them to come back, sort of like you could, if you could have given them some sort of spiritual camcorder, they could have just recorded it, come back and let you play it, and it would be like a video. I'm pretty sure, well, as sure as I can be of anything, like I suspect, that's a much more honest way of saying it. I suspect that what's actually going on is they're encountering this trans-temporal thing, all of being, and then as they re-enter time, their mind creates a way of holding the fact that they've gone through a tremendous transformation by encountering the existential thing. You find this a whole lot with people who take 5-MeO-DMT, for instance. There's typically two phases. In phase one, your whole face and being gets smashed into the trans-temporal isness, whatever that means. And you go through, like, many people have different encounters with this, but some sort of non-dual-esque slam into is. And then in phase two, they'll become more aware of their physical surroundings again, and then they're able to interact with people and kind of navigate and ask questions and so on. And they'll often come back with messages or with, oh, right, this is true, or profound love, and like all kinds of experiences. But many people cannot remember what happened in phase one. And they're told some of the physical things they were doing while they're totally checked out of their physical surroundings. They're often surprised. I did that? Huh. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if most, maybe all, near-death experiences involve something an awful lot like taking 5-MeO-DMT. In fact, it might literally be what's going on. My understanding is that that substance actually occurs naturally in the brain, and it might get released in profound amounts at the moment of death if the brain can. I don't know why it would, but there you go. Excuse me. I could totally believe that people go through that whole arc, and they just don't remember a lot of the truly non-dual aspect of being beyond physicality. Right? So, but I don't know. I don't know. There might just be a different range of experience beyond death that I haven't encountered. But my impression is that when people come back talking about the certainty of life after death and near death and reincarnation, that this is a reinterpretation within the flow of time of the encounter with consciousness that is the consciousness shining through. Like the consciousness looking out through my eyes, whatever that is, that isness is eternal, is beyond time. It's what allows time to exist in the first place, which is a fancy way of saying I experience time, and when I don't experience time, when I stop experiencing, time isn't here anymore for me, but what's the other perspective I can experience? There isn't one. Right? So there's this way in which that isness transcends this incarnation and currently transcends it and is there after I die and is there before I'm born. The languaging there being intentional to try to capture something about the trans-temporal nature of these experiences. But if you approximate it, it's like saying, well, I guess one way to say it is that my consciousness continues after death and will take another form after death and probably has done so before. But it doesn't make any sense in the space between lives. It makes zero sense. So there's like trying to make sense of, well, what is, when encountering this deep structure of what is it to experience anything? What is the capacity for experience that makes the mind capable of doing anything? You can't answer that with the mind because that does the same logic loop. That's the same thing as, oh, math is consistent with math, therefore math is true. No, that says math is consistent in this particular area. Same thing with, well, the reason we experience time is because first this chemical reaction happens in your brain and it creates this electrical stimulation and yada, yada, yada. Well, you're presuming time to make that description. What is your knowledge of time before you use time in order to explain it? And you can't do that with the mind. What you can do is show that time has a kind of internal consistency, and that your experience of time has a kind of internal consistency, but you can't show where your experience of time comes from doing that. The mind cannot do that. It will claim it can in many cases, but what it's doing is doubling down on the loop and then claiming consistency is the same thing as truth. From where do I, whoever that is, see these loops? Can't answer that question mentally, but I can see, I can experience. And from that vantage point, it is possible to be in touch with the profound glory of being in a way that touches into the illusion, the fusion of heaven and earth in flesh, this mind, this way of being. So then, when I look at death, what's there? If I am completely forgetting and I'm totally in this story, there's an end. There has to be. I mean, and I say this with a little bit of tongue-in-cheekedness. I grew up immortal. That's its own story, and I posted about it at some point in August. But like the short version is that as a child, when I started realizing, oh wait, am I going to die someday? My parents said, oh no, you won't. Here's the science about why. They signed me up for cryonics when I was 5, I think, when I was 5 years old. And at that age, I had this impression of cryonics is just a guaranteed backup. But science might make it so I never have to die anyway because it'll cure the aging of my body. It'll get better and better at healing the kind of damage that wipes people out. And cryonics, for those who don't know, this is instead of having my body cremated or buried, my body will be frozen at death. With the idea that that's as close as we can get to just putting the body on pause, and that if I can get my body far enough into the future when medical technology has advanced enough, then what today is considered death in enough time will be considered a medically critical condition. So if I can just get my body there, then they can heal whatever killed me. And because of the primitiveness of our current ability to suspend animation, this also means that whatever that medical tech is will have to reverse a lot of freezing damage. But it's much easier to reverse freezing damage than it is to reverse ash or rot. So I have a lot more sense of, well, how likely is that to work? And I've actually downgraded my estimates quite a lot since I was a kid. But the point is that I grew up with this emotional tone of not only am I going to live forever, and I just took this as a fact, but that's good. I grew up in a family that just looked at that as really good. And that the inclination to see death as what gives life meaning. But I still hold that that's completely nuts. That's utterly bonkers. I I may give my own rant of that because I think that there is something that is precious and protected about the nobility and virtue of death that I didn't understand growing up. And I've come to understand much more intimately, in large part from these kinds of spiritual experiences, that there is something very, very important and beautiful about the wisdom of death that I think a lot of immortalists, a lot of cryonicists, a lot of transhumanists don't own. And because of that, death is coming for them. Right? There's something very, very important and beautiful in that space that, to the extent that we don't own, causes death to look like a boogeyman. But there is also something really important about the fact that when someone we love is in a medically critical condition, we don't do philosophy about how death brings meaning to life. We take them to the hospital. We don't say, oh, I guess it was just their time. Or maybe it won't and they'll have a miraculous recovery. But like either way, it's like death is a gift. And it's wise not to avoid death. No, we take care of them. And we consider that good and virtuous. Not just like, oh, you're a good person, but like, I don't care if I'm a good person. I love this being, and I don't want them to die. Right? I claim there's an angle from which you can reconcile that being good and death being a beautiful teacher. I'll get into that in a future video, I imagine. But for now, the thing that I want to highlight is that I think I see the way in which death is an illusion. Right? And that doesn't mean that my cat didn't die, that wasn't sad, and that didn't matter. That really mattered. That mattered a great deal. There is a kind of sadness and horror for me in watching my parents age. And that's vividly real there. And it only works within the illusion. It only works within the flow of time. And that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. Right? That's part of this folding paradox of how is forgetting even possible? I don't know. I think in a very important way, I can't know. That is a profound experiential mystery that is beyond the mind. Although I'd be happy to be proven wrong, but I don't see how to be proven wrong in the same way I don't see how to show that we can rely on mathematics without using the mind to derive that, without using logic to derive it. It's like, I think we're just stuck with that. So, now in terms of practical lived experience with this, like in practice, a lot of what this does is it makes it a lot less scary for me to look the Grim Reaper in the eye and say, okay, let me see inside you. Because there's something absolutely marvelous about the fact that you can even exist. And in an ongoing way, this thing that I mentioned before about looking around and noticing, I have no idea how experience is possible. I have these stories about how a brain works and produces stuff and yada yada. But I don't know. And it's not just, I could be wrong. It might turn out to be this other thing. No, it's more like how, on what foundation is built this impression that science can describe anything? It's because of the centuries of science being diligent, and here is the logic. That's the consistency thing. And that's within the illusion of time. So what's the foundation? I don't know. And yet here is this experience. Oh my God. So getting really in touch with that that brings a kind of profound relief that I find immensely beautiful and practical. So, and I feel like I'm integrating this more and more every day, whatever that means. But I had this very lived experience of being in time. This is wonderful. Oh, this is like full of wonder and delightful. This and it there one of the results, and this is a place where I get the impression I differ from quite a bit of spiritual stuff. I'm not quite sure, but it's like it's very popular to bash on the ego. Oh, that's just the ego getting in the way. Yeah, the ego gets in the way. Isn't that marvelous? I love my ego. Like the way that I can love performing, right? And that my love of performing can get in the way of existence being clear in the illusion that I can encourage forgetting in myself and others. Wow. And that in the course of doing that, I can pretend to be this human with this individual life, going through these spiritual revelations. Only the ego can do that. What a gift. Maybe that's standard somewhere. I don't know. Um, but yeah, this is beautifully alive for me, and I find it becoming more and more alive every day, which is a source of egoic pride and relief. So, um, yeah, I feel pretty complete with that arc. That leads in a bunch of other directions that I think are beautiful. Um, I think I might quite soon try to dig into this rant that's in me about death and deathism, because I notice a way in which it occurs to me like almost everyone is wrong, and it's going to be a big challenge for me. Can I be clear and have a rant with that much energy in it? So I imagine that'll be soon. In the meantime, thank you for listening.